So about 7 months ago, I produced a video talking about my 1 month experience with a Ford Mustang that Ford loaned me during a COVID period. And at the end of that video, I promised that I would produce a video talking about my experience jumping behind the Subaru WRX STI again after a month in the Mustang. And unfortunately, I was planning on doing that about a week after I published that video of the Mustang, but unfortunately in Australia we went into a harsh lockdown for months and months and months. And we've really only just come out of that right about now. So even though it's 7 months later now, and unfortunately I don't think I'll have that pure comparison experience to compare to, I have taken my WRX out for an awesome mountain drive today, and this is probably the first time that I've actually had the chance to give it a proper drive over the last 7 months. So for me, I'm really interested to see how I feel about it, and I'll just talk about how my WRX goes. So the WRX obviously just grips like anything through the corners, and to be honest, I'm just driving the similar roads that I did in the Mustang video, and I don't even need to consider slowing down for any of these corners on this mountain that I'm driving on right now. And without a doubt, that level of confidence just cannot be replicated in the Mustang. And while the Mustang really made me think and plan how to attack every single corner because of that fear of death from the rear wheel drive, the WRX is a little bit different. Obviously, for any kind of cruising, like what I'm kind of doing right now, just kind of cruising the mountain roads, enjoying the day, I don't really need to be concerned about grip or anything like that. The car's going to hold it, generally speaking. And also going around corners and things like that, generally I can just go around them with braking with the gears or not braking at all, compared to obviously with the Mustang, where you certainly would need to consider that. What I have found refreshing though, getting back behind the wheel with my Rex, is it's a different kind of challenge with corners, because you start to think about how hard you do want to attack these corners. And that kind of driving is very, very different. But in this WRX STI, it's a different kind of way of tackling a corner. And when you're wanting to push yourself and get those thrills that I guess the Mustang gave you at a much lower speed, you really do have to push yourself in the Rex. But I'll have to say, doing so is very, very satisfying. Now for straight line performance, I think we'll all agree the Mustang's probably going to win that one. And while the Mustang was certainly fun to drive, and once it picked up the RPM and really started to put the power down, it is just on another league compared to what the WRX STI is. But up until that point where the Mustang really takes over, the power that you get from the WRX at launch and takeoff is something that the V8 cannot replicate. And for general daily driving, even traffic light drag races or any kind of spirited driving in that regard, the WRX, in my opinion, is probably the better drive. On top of that too, you know, once again, the WRX is foolproof. That all-wheel drive will take you off the road immediately every single time. Whereas in the Mustang, if you do get a little bit foot heavy and you put the foot down, you will spin the wheels a little bit, and that'll kill your enjoyment when you're trying to take off and things like that. Now the Mustang I did drive was automatic, and unfortunately I was very, very keen to try the manual variant, but unfortunately I haven't had the opportunity to do so yet. And reflecting back to my time with the Mustang, the number one thing I wasn't a fan of in that car was the 10-speed automatic. It did not handle itself very well on the roads, in my opinion. I think there are certain cars where 10 speeds are obviously granted, but I think the Mustang is probably more of a car that might deserve having less gears. In the middle of spirited driving, trying to figure out which gear out of 10 to click down to just wasn't a satisfying experience, and it did not have the shift response time that you would expect from other cars like a Volkswagen Golf R or something like that. From a styling perspective though, the Mustang takes the win. As I mentioned, driving the Mustang around the neighborhood, it just seemed like everyone really enjoyed to look at this car. And jumping back into my WRX, what I will say is, you know, the car people, the people that know what you're driving, I would say those people, when you spot them on the road, they seem to take this car a little bit more seriously compared to the Mustang. But for that general crowd appeal, I think the Mustang really does take the cake. And if you're interested in a car that does get attention, that's probably a good thing. So in the cabin though, like, in my opinion, the Mustang is leaps and bounds ahead of the Subaru WRX. And while the WRX gets a few cool features like, you know, the DCCD and things like that, they're more mechanical features. And really, when you strip this car down to what it really is just an Impreza. The interior is extremely basic, I guess, especially considering we're now in 2021. I mean, when this car kind of came out in 2016, 2015, I think the interior was pretty well respected. Now, while this interior is quite old, it does function really well, and there is nothing unnecessary in it. So the steering wheel, in my opinion, is one of the things I'm not the biggest fan of in this current generation of WRX. And one of the things that kind of grinds my gears is just how unnecessarily large and obnoxious the buttons are on the steering wheel itself. Now, while they all serve a purpose, there's a hell of a lot of buttons. Some of them are pretty useless and unnecessary to have on the steering wheel. But also, I just think there could have been a much neater design implemented on this vehicle. Now, unfortunately, the seats are the only thing in the WRX that gets heated. Everything else is just normal, and I'm absolutely devastated about that because the Mustang's heated and cooled steering wheel was absolutely amazing. Now, the WRX unfortunately only gets heated seats. It misses out on the cooled seat option and does not get heated steering wheel either. And unfortunately, I'm so devastated about that because, in my opinion, it was one of my favorite features of the Mustang. Now, a lot of you would probably argue they're unnecessary and shut up, and yeah, fair enough, it's a sports car, none of that's necessary, but the nice to haves are appreciated. The Mustang also gets a lot more customization too, so on the dashboard and everything, you can customize how it looked and everything. And with the Rex, everything you get from a digital perspective is just set up to be as it is out of the factory. There really is no customization, really. And that probably takes me back to the Mustang. The interior just had a more refined look. Everything looked a little classy and things like that. And I mean, we're not comparing the Mustang or the Rex to a Mercedes or anything like that, because that's a different discussion. But when we're talking about those kind of 50, 60 grand cars that give you the performance options, I really do think the Mustang takes it out. And let's talk about the exhaust for a second. So the Mustang, obviously out of the factory, has an amazing sounding exhaust, and I was very impressed with that. But the Rex, out of the box, there is no exhaust noise really, so I have fitted an NVIDIA Q300 exhaust to this car, just to give it that boxer rumble, which is obviously very, very good. I'm quite a fan of both the V8s and the WRX rumbles, so look, to be honest, I'll probably say the Mustang wins from a noise perspective, but I think really either one of the cars sound great. It really depends on what you prefer. So you'd probably be asking me, how do I feel about my experience with the Mustang and the WRX? And look, I'll have to be honest, I probably can't pick. I actually think I really like both cars, and God, I still am thinking if I did get to try that manual Mustang, I might be very, very tempted to make the switch. But what I will say is, being back behind my WRX, which I've owned for 3 or 4 years now, it does feel like home. And what I really do enjoy is the car can be a daily driver when you want it to be. It can be a weapon when you want it to be. And when you do want to push yourself and challenge your driving expertise, the Rex can push you to places that the Mustang certainly will not. There's no other way to say it, but if you're driving your Rex to the point where it's kicking out sideways, you would well and truly most likely be dead if you were driving the Mustang. And if you're the type of person that enjoys corners and that raw driving experience out in the hills, then I think the Rex is probably the one for you. So I think if I had to wrap up my overall experience with the WRX and the Mustang, look, I would actually say that I would own both. I really would. I would love to be in a position to have both of these cars. I really do think they're perfect cars for different situations, and I think whatever car you pick, you will certainly miss an experience that the other car can deliver. Now, I think what that means is I certainly have an appreciation for a lot of cars, especially working in the automotive industry. I'm not biased to any of them. I'm not a fanboy to any particular brand, really. And overall, I would be happy to own both. So there we go, guys. I hope you enjoyed that video. That was just my quick wrap up on my experience behind the wheel of my WRX again after so long. If you did like this video, please think about liking and subscribing to the channel too. It is greatly appreciated. And jump into the written description too, just for a little bit of extra information. And otherwise, we'll see you around for the next video. See you later.